really, I hope you have a really good night tonight, and the discussions are interesting for you and you can take something away. I'm really honoured, as I said, to welcome you to this event on behalf of Woolworths. I just wanted to tell you a bit about what we believe in as an organisation, and it's something that is really close to my heart as well. So we really firmly believe that the best teams are those in which people can come to work and be themselves and be their true and authentic selves. And until you can create that culture, you're never going to get the best out of people. And we're a people business. We employ across Australia just under 200,000 people. So if we can create a great environment for LGBTIQ plus people, then we're creating a great environment for actually a really large section of Australia, the Australian population. And that's a responsibility that we don't take lightly. I guess the other aspect is that, for me, a sense of belonging in Woolworths is about my individuality being valued. It's being respected as the person that I am and not feeling that I need to change anything about myself to belong in that organisation. And again, that's something that is very close to our heart. In my role of Head of Diversity and Inclusion, obviously it's kind of my job, right, to make sure that happens. But I'm also the co-chair of Proud at Woolworths Group, and we're called Proud for a reason. We're really proud of the people who work within our organisation, but we're also really proud of what we've managed to achieve in the last couple of years, particularly in Woolworths. We have been working really solidly on LGBTIQ plus inclusion for a number of years now, but we submitted to the AWEI index, which is the Australian Workplace Equality Index, probably about 3 years ago. And it's probably an indication as to where we were as an organisation when we got our results and found that we just got participating employer, and that's about it, which is kind of like, it's a nice, nice to show up. Thanks for coming, but try harder. So we took that on the chin and went, okay, we're going to try harder. We went away, and 12 months later, we went from participating employer to gold tier status in the AWEI, which is the highest tier you can get within that index. What it says to me actually is that what we did was we harnessed the power of the people within our organisation, and not just LGBTIQ plus people, but allies as well. And allies are absolutely critical to our ability to make change within Woolworths. And they are critical, I think, to make change anywhere in the world when it comes to creating an inclusive culture. So I just wanted to make sure, I guess, that, you kind of understand where we come from. I think people often look at Woolworths and they go, oh, it's a massive corporate, they're all bad. Actually, Woolworths is made up of 200,000 people who really care, and we do our best to make sure that the environment that we create is the best one that we can for the people who work within our teams, but also for our customers. And every day we are working really hard to do more and more and create a more inclusive environment that we have already. Absolutely, we have more to do. We always do. It never ends. But it's certainly with the support of really passionate people, passionate allies within our organisation that we can make change happen. So I hope you enjoy the panel tonight. So I'm really looking forward to having a chat with everyone on the panel, and hopefully you can take away a few things from the night. So welcome.
Thank you, Rachel. Just a quick introduction of our other panelists. Here we have Cindy He, who is a lawyer working in government relations and political advocacy. Cindy also contributed to Victorian government initiatives to raise LGBTIQ awareness and support among multicultural communities. So thanks for coming, Cindy. We also have Archie Bolter. He's an advocate and co-founder and co-CEO of Queertown, which is a digital media hub. Archie also works with the health and aged care sectors with Transgender Victoria and Rainbow Health Victoria. Thank you, Archie. And finally, we have Janelle De Silva, who's a director, producer, social justice educator at Revolution, I believe. Is that Revolution? Third Stage Productions and Cherry Pop Productions. So thanks for coming, Janelle. Now I'd like to introduce Francis Gamble, who's the State Director of Out for Australia in Victoria, who will be moderating tonight's panel discussion. Thank you.
Please take a seat. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you Wenjui for that introduction, and thank you Rachel as well for welcoming us here in the Dan Murphy Cellar program. So as Wenjui said, my name is Francis Gamble. I'm the Victorian Director for Out for Australia. My pronouns are she, her. Before we begin tonight, I do want to provide a bit of a content warning. We will be discussing issues relating to our personal identities and lives as LGBTQIA+ people. So just a content warning for that. And also to flag that myself and some of the panelists may be using the word queer as a synonym or in place of the acronym LGBTQIA+, or to refer to people who identify outside the heterosexual cisgender identity. And next up, I just wanted to mention that this is a safe space. If at any point you do feel the need to step out, that's completely okay, and you're welcome here. Okay, so to give you the outline of this panel discussion, we've got a few prepared questions for our panelists. I'll be starting doing a bit of an introduction. That'll go for about half an hour or so, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience. So while our panelists are talking, please make sure that you're thinking of different questions that you might be interested in hearing them from. Tonight's theme is allyship. We're discussing all things to do with LGBTQIA+ allies, and we'll be getting into what we mean about that shortly. Anyway, first question. What is your job? So I'm going to direct this to everyone on the panel. Cindy, I might start with you if that's okay. So the reason obviously this question is topical. Out for Australia, we're all about being your most authentic self in the workplace. So to tie in with tonight's topic, Cindy, what is your job? And what role have allies played in enabling you to be your most authentic self at work?
Hi, so I'm Cindy. I've actually got two jobs. So my day job, I work as an account executive at the Civic Group, which is a strategic communications company. So we do a lot of work in government and media relations, implementation of media campaigns, crisis management. We've worked with clients across many different industries, including a long list of local councils, government departments, and private organisations. A couple of organisations we've worked with recently have included LGBTIQ organisations, including AGMC, Victorian Pride Centre, which is an amazing project if you haven't yet heard of it. So that's been quite rewarding for me. My second job, I actually started a side hustle way before I worked at Civic, and this is due to my previous experience working in China, where I interned at the Australian Trade Department in Guangzhou, and I also worked for the Australian Chamber of Commerce. And so when I came back to Australia, I decided to start a business doing Chinese social media marketing and branding. Now initially this was going to be very commercially focused, but as we started getting clients, we got clients in fashion, we got clients in food and beverages, we actually got in touch with a guy who was working on a Victorian government LGBTIQ initiative, where they were specifically trying to devise campaigns targeting the Chinese community and the Greek community. And I thought this was incredibly interesting because for me, coming from a Chinese background, the controversy surrounding safe schools and the queer community in general was huge. in the Chinese communities in the city of Whitehorse and the city of Monash, and in fact, that sort of controversy was a huge deciding factor in the last 2 federal elections in those electorates. So for me, getting to work on that sort of initiative while providing them advice on how to approach it for a Chinese lens, that's what I've been working on recently, and it's been so great because I don't think a lot of people have started to work on LGBTIQ issues quite strongly in ethnic communities or in multicultural communities, or if they have, they haven't done so in a very direct sort of media campaign. And so having, working at Civic and then getting in touch with Daniel, who is working on behalf of the Department of Premier and Cabinet, now we're actually looking at different pictures, different quotes, different things we can put into a video that will be put on WeChat, the Chinese messaging app, which Chinese people, they only use WeChat, they don't use Facebook, they don't use Instagram. And so we're really trying to target, at least on my end, doing the Chinese community stuff, this is what I've been focusing on. And just as an interesting side note, my parents were quite homophobic, and for the last couple of years, I've constantly talked back to them whenever they've raised the issue of gay people. And my mum used to be the sort of person, if she saw a gay couple kissing on the street, she'd have to say something about it. She'd have to say something about it. And I got to the point where I just kept bringing it up, and I just kept talking about it, and I kept telling them I have a lot of gay friends, and they're amazing people. I participated in a lot of campaigns. I somehow got myself featured on a national video campaign for Australian marriage equality because I was being really angry at a forum once, and I stood up and made a speech and they captured it. And I wasn't intending that at all, but it just happened. And I eventually showed that video to my parents. And after all that time, both my parents voted yes to the marriage equality plebiscite. Yeah, so that's just a bit of background to me.
Thank you, Cindy. Yeah, that's an incredibly powerful story. Thank you so much. Next up, I might go to Archie. Archie, what's your job, and how's allyship been important to you in your career so far?
Thank you. Better turn this on and put my wine down. Yeah, it's really awesome to be here. My name's Archie, and I use they, them pronouns. So I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Queertown, and Queertown is an online destination packed full of LGBTIQA+ digital media, including videos, podcasts, writing, and artwork designed by queer people for queer people. So essentially, my co-founder and myself, we saw that there was a huge gap in Australian digital media in that most of the queer content we had was US-based. A lot of it was really negative. A lot of it was actually pitched at non-queer people to educate them on what being queer was. And it was scattered across the internet. It was really hard to find. So at Queertown, we're building a central hub that brings all of this content to one place. And importantly, we're bringing a mix of voices because current media is typically from white, cis, gay men. And so as white people ourselves, it's really important to us that we're elevating other voices. So that's been a really exciting experience. And I'd say that my interest in creating queer spaces was sparked back in high school, at Melbourne High School, which Wenjui actually went to as well, which we just connected over. And so when I was there, I had a really tough time going to an all-boys school as someone who identified or was still figuring out my gender diversity. So me and a couple of queer mates, we actually established one of Australia's first mainstream queer support groups within a school, which within a very traditional institution such as Melbourne High School was a very interesting experience, to say the least. And it ended up changing all of our lives and saving some lives as well, just to have a safe space to explore and express yourself, and to see the transformation of people in the group was really powerful. And I'd say that really shifted the trajectory of my life, and I've just focused on creating queer spaces since then. And I've done similar work at Cross Museums Victoria recently, establishing LGBTIQA+ advisory boards at Melbourne Museum and Science Works and the Immigration Museum, and then more recently co-founding Queertown. So really passionate about queer spaces. And in terms of allyship, I've probably spoken for a little while, so we'll probably touch on some of that as we go. But we love our allies. Yeah.
Thank you, Archie. Janelle, I might move on to yourself.
Thanks.
How would you describe your job?
Hi everyone, Wenjui. Hi, do you mind getting me a bottle of water, please? Thanks. My job's bossing people around. It's true. My job is to be in my body and present on the planet as a Western privileged person of colour. And so, I would firstly like to just say thank you to the Bunurong and the Wurundjeri, because I don't know, I don't actually know how they related to their identities of their sexual preferences and their roles within their mob. But I'm sure there was a beauty to it, and so I want to acknowledge that that was happening here for, you know, as we know, over 60,000 years, and so we're kind of fumbling along on country. So what I do is I'm a professional creative social disruptor, and I'm invited into spaces to be an antagonist creatively. I was born like that, so I've created a profession where I can get paid for it now. I didn't realise I was born like that, but when I worked out that I was queer and a person of colour, and I was told that by others, defined by that, I realised that it was important that I found my way creating my own work, because I've been in the arts and entertainment industry for over 25 years. I've worked on the BBC in the UK and ABC. I worked as a co-host on live television. I've worked on Channel 10 and Channel 7 and Channel 9 and SBS, and on stages across the country. And I'm just going to have Archie, can you open that for me, please? Thank you, darling. Cheers. Excuse me a second. So I've worked out that my intersectionality defines me as a person, and to be more specific, as an Australian, I've really struggled to work out how do I do my work with integrity and purpose, and in a way that defines success for myself, integrating my intersectionality. And that's taken a while, but I found that I'm on a road now that is a very clear path, because it doesn't exist. I'm not sure if you relate to that, but my company, one of my main companies that I'm running with my co-producer Tonya Field, just over here, is called Revolvolution Productions, and so we create queer, intersectional, political, feminist art, performance, and education spaces, educational spaces. And that can look like many things, and we're invited into formalised spaces, but we also just disrupt by creating space. I won't go into allyship too much, but I felt it really important to introduce Tonya to you, because they're my ally. They're like, yeah, for people of colour, you probably understand what it's like when a white person helps you out. So there was one more thing I wanted to introduce to you, is that I'm a philanthropist. So I run marathons to raise money for the Cathy Freeman Foundation. and I've been doing that for about 4 years now, and I'm the highest individual fundraiser, and my campaign is called Run Bitch Run, and you can YouTube the spoken word clip, and I am passionate about paying it forward, but also paying the rent. And as an Australian, that's how I choose to do it. I've got 5 kids, and they have access to healthcare and education, and kids in community that the Cathy Freeman Foundation support, which are just 4 communities out of many, they provide educational opportunities for those kids. So,
yeah, thanks very much.
handing it
Neil.
over.
Thank you. Okay, and Rachel, I feel like we got a bit of an insight into your job at the start of the panel when you provided that lovely introduction. So if you would like to touch on anything else, please do so. But perhaps if we could move more into that idea of how allyship has been important to you in the workplace, and bringing your whole self to work, especially given your long career at Woolworths.
Thanks, Francis. I just wanted to mention, though, I was fighting with Archie about who had the best job in the world earlier tonight, and, well, I don't know, I'd like to just make a point that I think I have the best job in the world. I get paid to ensure that people feel good about coming to Woolworths and they can be their true self, so it's pretty awesome. Maybe we'll tie, like we can agree to tie. When I think about allyship, I don't know if I mentioned in the intro, but I've actually worked for Woolworths for 31 years. So it's a really, really long time. And I think I know I look too young. You're supposed to go, oh my God, how does she do that? So anyway, what that's given me actually is the ability to see how an organisation evolves over time, and how society evolves over time as well in conjunction with that. They're obviously both intertwined. And for me, allyship it's like when you are not out at work and you are really struggling with your sexual orientation, you feel completely isolated, you see no role models anywhere. And if I think back to myself as a 15-year-old joining Woolworths Group for the first time, I saw no one like me. Like, there was no one. No role models, nothing was spoken about. The only time I ever heard mention of someone who was gay, it was in a derogatory way. There was a really homophobic environment, and it's really disconcerting and isolating as a young person. And when we're talking back in the 90s, it wasn't the best time. Actually, it was the late 80s, early 90s. It was not the best time to be a lesbian, a gay man, anything really. It wasn't amazing. Some of you were probably only just born then, so be grateful, right? You don't have to go back there. But working in that environment, it's really, really challenging. And when I think about allyship, I think about the first people who I could be open with. And I've got to say that probably took about 7 years all up of working at Woolies for me to suddenly find somebody who I could just talk about my life as a whole. And I could talk about, I actually vividly remember I was a service deli 2IC, so the sliced meat section. I was working there as a 19-year-old, and I wore this amazing all-in-one white dress. I don't know if anyone remembers them, but they had this massive zip up the middle. I combined that look with Doc Martens and a paper hat. I don't know if you can picture it, but I was hot, right? So I remember vividly though, my partner, we've actually been together. I stick at things a really long time. So I met my partner Emily when we were 19, right? So, and we're married now. So it's whatever I choose to do, I do it. Thank you. I do it really long term. So she would come and visit me in a supermarket in suburban Adelaide, and we would have lunch together.
And I was so afraid that somebody would see her and that I would have to talk about the fact that, you know, she was my partner and, you know, I was a lesbian and all of those kind of things, that we would sit outside the shopping centre around the corner so no one could see us. And the whole time she was there, I'd be on edge, like, oh my God, someone's going to find out, and then what am I going to do? Because there was no one like me. I didn't know. I think when you're not out at work, you are so full of fear. Like every moment you're going, oh God, who's going to ask me what, you know, and you're filtering all the time. And I'm sure you've all, you know, had some experience with that. It's exhausting. So for me, allyship gives you license. It gives you a voice. It allows you, you know, when you meet people who say, you're a really good person, and that you're a really good person, and all of those things that make up you are important, and I want to know about all of it, and I'm going to talk to you in a way that I would talk to anybody else. And it's that incredible sense of freedom that gives you when you understand actually that you can just talk normally about your life, and it's like a weight is lifted off your shoulders. It's like you've been drowning in a swimming pool and someone has come and just picked you up and went, no, I'm going to save you here. It's going to be okay. And for me, that has had a profound impact on my life overall. I can't really imagine actually what life would have been like if early on, when I was really struggling with that, if I didn't have a few people who went, you know what, you're cool, you know, you're okay, and you know, you can tell me anything you want, and yes, that Service Ellie outfit looks amazing, Rachel, like you know, you're going to make it in this world if you can continue to wear that, and if you make sure that you slice the meat, you know, just so. So that's allyship for me.
Yeah, I feel like you touched on a number of really important themes there of what it actually looks like in the workplace. That idea of listening to your voice and therefore making it so that you feel as though you're no longer afraid to be yourself and feel that sense of relief. So I think that that provides a really good segue for one of our other panelists to maybe discuss what do you feel like allyship looks like in your line of work. So Archie, perhaps if you want to talk to your work in the health sector.
Cool. Yeah, I do some work with Transgender Victoria and Rainbow Health Victoria. Most often it's in the health sector. So yeah, we work in aged care facilities, typically with staff, as opposed to residents, as one example. But I would say in my experience, and I suppose like coming into myself and understanding my own needs as a queer person, really understanding that an ally, and it's very cliche, please forgive, but really is a verb rather than a noun. And I think someone who feels open-minded or accepting may say, oh, I'm an ally, like I'm open-minded, I put up with people, you know. Whereas for me, like an ally is someone who takes that next step and actively does something to create positive change, or to actively support members of the community. And there is a real difference, and it takes a lot of guts and courage and sometimes resources to do that, so it can be challenging. But in my experience, the allies for me that stand out are the people who I think of someone who, when I'm misgendered at work or someone uses the wrong pronouns, that person who'll say, oh, hey, just so you know, Archie uses they, them pronouns. That small act to me is like, shit, yeah, that's like an active ally, you've got my back, because it's quite daunting to have that experience, and it can feel threatening, or it can feel scary or intimidating or just tiring, as I'm sure queer or LGBTIQA plus people tonight can understand, to constantly be doing that work. So if you're doing some labour on behalf of another community, I'd say you're being a great ally. And better yet, if you can do that labour without making a member of that community do labour, that's even better. AKA get out there and do some reading, or get out there and figure out some ways to be an ally, rather than going to a LGBTIQA plus person and saying, hey, where should I start? What do I do? How can I help you? It's like Google. And in the aged care facilities in particular, it's so specific because we're working with people who are in their 80s, their 90s, who lived through a time where being queer was illegal. There are people who may be sex offenders, registered sex offenders just for being a gay man, for example. Someone may have experienced conversion therapy. Someone may have been isolated from their family. So that type of care and allyship needs to be really specific. So I would say allyship is not broad strokes. It's very specific to the member of the community that you're dealing with.
Yeah, thanks, Archie. I think that's that's really very much speaks to the importance of allyship and why it's important for the LGBTQIA+ community. I think perhaps Janelle, would you maybe be able to speak a bit more to why allyship is so important? She's obviously touched on a few things here.
Yeah. I think with age, I've gleaned some lessons from my life experience, and what I see now as true allyship is when someone can acknowledge their privilege and their access to visibility in not only their workplace but in all areas of their life. I consider allyship to be synonymous with the idea or the knowing, or maybe not the knowing, because I think a lot of our actions are unconscious behaviour. And what I do is I guess I'm stripping it back, and the way that I'm looking at the world is that we're all operating from a process of socialisation. So we're all socialised to behave a certain way. And within our times, our institutional power is built upon a patriarchal structure, which it has created foundations of racism, misogyny, and then discrimination, so that oppression moves from the top down all through all institutionalized forms of power. For those of you who identify as white in the room, that might be something that you don't really think about a lot. Maybe in the past 10 years it might have started to come into more wider social circles and culture. But, you know, for the past 100 years, and let's talk about the past, at least 30 years that we've been working as professionals, or that I have and Rachel has and maybe some of you in the room, it's been incredibly difficult for people who are marginalised or are identified as other, they've been othered, to be accepted, invited, or even seen or heard in professional spaces, let alone life. So allyship to me is a lot about what Archie has said. It is about doing, and it's very, I guess if you have a look at what Adam Goodes has been doing, it's very overt work, the way he's calling out racism. And so for me, I guess I'm not even talking about being, a LGBTQI+ person, because for me, I'm dealing with my intersectionality all the time. So that brings into the space all the time levels of implicit bias and prejudice consistently, always. It's always functioning because we're socialised to behave that way. I, like all of you, have been colonised, and we are operating from that mindset unconsciously. And so the decolonisation process is a conscious choice, and it's tricky because it's about having conversations in lots of different circumstances, like even when, yesterday being served by a waitress and being called guys, simple basic things where you know, I said, maybe next time when you want to address people, you might want to use another term other than guys, just in case we don't identify as that. And, you know, so I'm having conversations like that all the time, everywhere. And so an ally, I think, is particularly a person who has access to power and privilege. So a white identifying person doing something about dismantling the systems of institutionalized oppression.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much for that. Thanks very much for that, Janelle. So yeah, some very important points there about making sure that you're less seen and heard in professional spaces. But I think really what you were getting at was that idea of intersectionality and really interrogating those power structures, especially around different cultural and racial identities. And I think that really was, Cynthia, when we were talking earlier, you were mentioning about your cultural community and how, just looking to see, are there any unique challenges that you find in being an ally, and how have you approached those?
So for me, there have definitely been some challenges that are more unique to my community in terms of talking about LGBTIQ issues. And I can actually describe this with a story. So I have a lot of very close friends who do identify as queer. And actually I would classify myself as queer, but I haven't come out to my parents yet. And I find this to be quite common among my multicultural friends. And so even though most of my friends are now working full-time, they've got long-term partners, they still haven't talked to the parents about this, and they're so scared. Secondly, is that coming from a Chinese community, you don't ever talk about this sort of stuff with your parents. You usually don't. You don't talk about I don't talk about my feelings with my parents, not like some of my white friends who are like best friends with their parents. We're not like that. I barely talk to my parents at home. And so for me to be able to talk to them about sexual identity, sexual orientation, that's not really gonna happen unless I really make an effort. And so I remember back in early 2017, there was a marriage equality forum being held at Box Hill Town Hall for the electorate of Chisholm. And so that was months before the marriage equality plebiscite. And I was really curious. I really wanted to go because Box Hill, if you know Box Hill, you'll see that there are Chinese language signs everywhere. You know, almost everybody looks, you know, East Asian. You can hear Mandarin, you can hear Cantonese. All the restaurants, all the real estate businesses, they're Chinese, right? So I just wanted to see. I was so tired that day, but I went anyway. And when I actually got there, at Box Hill Town Hall, for a forum that was supposed to represent that city and Chisholm, everybody was white, except for two people, me and one other guy. That guy was a guest speaker who was replaced at the last minute by a white footballer because they thought that would get more media attention. And so you had Channel 7 there, you had ABC there, you had some TV reporters there. They loved the footballers, they were asking them lots of questions. I'm sitting there with another Asian guy in Box Hill, and that was the scene, right? And I didn't intend to, you know, make a scene or anything. But when it got to question and answer time, I stood up. I was the first person to stand up, you know, and I was like, and I called out the elephant in the room. I was like, I feel like I need to speak up about something that was quite obvious. If you just take a look around, how many non-white people do you see? And it was a little bit awkward. But then I said, you have to understand. As Rachel said, she barely saw people, role models, back in the late 80s, 90s. For me, right, and my friends, that is still the case. You know, like, and so to go to this forum where there were only two Asian people, it was so disappointing. So disappointing. And so I made that speech, and I was so worked up, and I talked about how important it is for us to see ourselves represented, that eventually they took videos of me and then they called me aside and they asked me, well, what you said was completely right. We're so sorry. We didn't think of this. It was so bad of us. But we would love for you to be in our video campaign for the National Marriage Equality Facebook video. And I said, well, hell yeah. So they gave me a sign and I wrote, I support marriage equality in Chinese. I said it in Chinese. I spoke about why I supported it in Chinese. And then they featured it on their video. And so for somebody who didn't even intend to do anything that night, I ended up being on the national video campaign. And I showed that video to my parents, which obviously shocked my mother quite a bit. But I mean, I think that was a huge part of why they eventually voted yes, because they saw their daughter really talking to them, engaging and normalizing it, and not being afraid to tell them, hey, like, this is what it's like. And so that moment was kind of like the starting point of how I really started to get involved as an ally, as a supporter, and in LGBTIQ issues within the Chinese community.
Yeah, thank you for standing up in what I'm sure would have been a very, very tough situation. I'm going to take the opportunity now to see if we have any questions burning away in the audience. I might get one of our volunteers. Lacey, would you mind? If anyone's got a question, Lacey's going to come bring the microphone around. We've got a couple here. Just over here, please.
Thanks. It's more of a comment, really, but what you're talking about, Cindy, when you call people out, that's a very awkward conversation for you to have in a way, and it's a very complex sort of social interaction when you've got a group of people. But those are the kinds of conversations that an ally needs to have, really, in my mind. It's not just like paying lip service and saying, yeah, I'm an ally, and it's doing it and doing the really hard work, which is what you did, but perhaps they should have done before, and you only got sort of to that national campaign because of that moment, whereas it might have been more ideal if you got to that. You didn't have to have that moment, maybe, but if you did have that moment, that's fine too, because those awkward conversations need to happen, and we need to sit with those moments of discomfort. It's not that if those people that didn't made the mistake of inviting the footballer, they're not bad people, but they just need to acknowledge that was their bias, and that they can correct that and sit with that, and that's fine, you know. And we need to keep having those conversations to kind of unpack all this and get anywhere.
Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to add to that what Archie said before about having active and passive allies. For me, yeah, I think you need to be an active ally, because I can think of a lot of people who might consider themselves an ally, but if their parents said something like, oh, look at that, you know, they wouldn't say anything. And for me, an ally epitomizes the fact that you speak up for people when they can't do it themselves. Okay, that's what it means. So if you're at home and your brother or your parents or a friend says something that is, you know, that really doesn't sit well with you, you should say that, you should call it out. I mean, and you can be tactful about it, but you should do it. And people have kept quiet for, you know, too long, and I know a lot of my Chinese Australian friends don't really talk about that with their parents. But for me, because I did that, I was able to persuade my parents to vote yes. And I can only imagine what sort of changes might have occurred if my friends did the same.
Yeah, thank you. Did anyone else want to comment on that? Yeah.
It just triggered something for me about within my workplace. It's quite difficult, I've noticed over the past couple decades, because I have worked in, essentially I need to audition for a job. So I have about 5 to 10 minutes of presenting my interpretation of a character. 99.99% of the narrative that I am auditioning for is completely entrenched with unconscious bias. Essentially, even if I'm being cast, and generally I have always been cast as a racist stereotype, it's always seen through generally a white, cis, hetero, Christian, patriarchal, misogynist perspective, and that narrative is consistently being reinforced. And I've been trained as an actor to act like that, so actors act like that as well. And when you don't identify as that, so I act really well as a white person. I can talk white, I can present white, and I can get jobs being white characters, the white interpretation of a person of colour through white dialogue and white eyes. And I'm saying white a lot because it's not something that we even have in our narrative, our socialised narrative, that we don't even acknowledge that people of fair skin are a race, but we make people who aren't white a race. So I find that what is difficult is allies in my industry, they don't need to have, like if you look at a room full of writers for any, like if you think of your favourite show, what's your favourite show on Netflix right now, or your favourite show? If you watch anything Australian, does anyone watch anything Australian? How many people of colour are in it? And is that person of colour in your favourite show a person of colour, not just the dad or the teacher or the neighbour? They generally are the criminal, or there's something got to do with their race. So I find allyship within my industry is about literally inviting people to the table, or just stepping back and handing over the keys and just actually going, here's the money, you write it. You write it. Like, because being queer and being of colour, like what queer performers or what queer theatre or film or like that's mainstream in Australia exists? Who is queer in our mainstream entertainment who's of colour? Like how many people? How many women? So just, yeah, it's as if, so visibility is, I guess, what I'm talking about, and lack of.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Janelle. We might throw it out to another question. You had a couple of hands up. Yes, this just opened up.
Thanks, and thanks for Woolworths for hosting these type of events. It's great that we have this opportunity. I work in an organisation that has offices in remote parts of Australia, and one of the challenges we have is that I suppose we have a number of our workforce that just are not respectful, and we've got this issue with disrespectful behaviour. And I think we talked a little bit about the role of the bystander, and my thoughts is of what we're trying to do in our organisation, our Pride Network, is to ensure that people are very clear their role as a bystander, not just an ally, but their role as a bystander and what they can do to actually ensure that more safe and inclusive work environment. Have you got any other ideas of how we can kind of encourage our communities to become more inclusive and perform that role of the bystander and step up?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really important question. And I think we've been talking quite a bit about what that looks like for our community, but perhaps Archie might give it over to yourself to talk about what that also might look like for within our community.
Yeah, thanks for a great question, and I'm really glad we got to talk or start to talk about regional and rural experiences as well, because we kind of talk about the LGBTIQA+ movement and we're kind of thinking metropolitan existence and that movement, whereas when you do go to regional and rural areas, and I've done a lot of work in those areas, it's a really different landscape and a really different climate socially. So it is really important to consider. And I think what we're talking about tonight, which I'm really excited about, intersectionality keeps coming up. And I think that, to me, is going to be a really big takeaway from this conversation tonight. And that when people talk about allyship, it's not just focused on one element of a person's identity, aka being LGBTIQA+. We're talking about all the different institutions that oppress a person based on their identity, and living in a remote or regional area is a form of intersectionality. And so I think in my experience, it really takes top-down cultural change, particularly within a workplace. So normalising, and it can be really challenging, and there's inevitably going to be friction and kickback at the start, but like introducing things like, you know, people put their pronouns in their email signatures and that becomes the norm. Maybe we look at the forms, the intake forms for whatever our organisation is, and reviewing them. Is this accessible for everyone? Is there an opportunity for someone to state their gender rather than making them tick a box? Is there an opportunity for someone to list their pronouns so we know how to refer to this person? So making that organisation wide and then implementing training is so important, and not just as a tick box, as something that's ongoing. So there are a ton of organisations to do that, and that's exciting because we can actually pay queer people to do this work as well, which is positive. So I would say that acknowledging that it is tough, it is challenging, it is a different landscape, but we need organisations, sounds like your own, that are willing to do that hard work. So yeah.
Yeah, this microphone. Thank you. That sounds some incredibly important ideas there, and I think that idea of top-down cultural change, Rachel, I think you might have something you want to say to that in regards to Woolworths there.
Yeah, actually, it really made me think about how we are managing the situation, because we're exactly the same as you. We have incredibly geographically dispersed. We're essentially in every community across Australia, and you're right, Archie's right, the metro experience is incredibly different to remote Australia. Two things I think are really helping us. One is that we have a very, very strong purpose and values-driven culture, and people are held accountable to their behaviour based to what are our shared values. So there is a much more consistent, I think, expectation of behaviour, and the way that we treat people and the way that we care about people is consistent across the organisation. There are always outliers. There will always be people who behave in a way that's really inappropriate and disrespectful and all of those things, but we manage that by exception. But I think shared purpose and values is really important. The second thing that's working quite well for us is actually increasing the level of education in those areas. So in recent times, we had a large segment of our store leadership team from Kalgoorlie, not only the supermarket, but then also the BWS store as well. They went along to Fighting Diversity ally training. And you know what, it's having such a ripple effect. You know, the more that you can actually engage allies in remote areas, the easier it becomes for everybody else. But you know, it's absolutely sharing the load of calling out behaviour. So I think education is incredibly important as well.
Thank you for that, Rachel. So we're nearing the end of our panel tonight, and so I thought a nice way for us to wrap up is to have one takeaway that you would like for the audience of a practical step that you could take to be a better ally, and whoever would like to go first, your most simple, straightforward action, although let's not reduce it to that as well. Rachel, yes.
Mine's a really simple one. Be curious, listen to people, understand that your perspective will be different to theirs, and really be the voice for people when they don't have the energy or they just don't feel like they can speak up. Just do that for them. But ultimately, I would say interested and care about people. I think that's at the basis of everything, actually.
Thank you. Janelle?
No, not ready yet.
Alright. Archie?
Yeah, mine would be to review and reflect your understanding of LGBTIQA+. I think it's become a buzzword, and people, when they say LGBTQIA+, they're thinking of gay, lesbian, maybe even bi. They're probably thinking of a white person, an able-bodied person, a cis person. They're probably thinking of a gay, white, cis male. So I would interrogate you as an ally to look at how you're being an ally to each member of that community. In particular, I would like to elevate in this moment the intersex community. There is a complete lack of awareness of the issues facing the intersex community. 1.7% of the Australian population has an intersex variation. That's the same number of people who are born with naturally red hair. It's actually very common, and they have a very hard time in our society. So there's a lot of work being done. So maybe tonight, if you want to take the next step, you can look at how I can support the intersex movement. A great place to start is trying to challenge surgery on newborn babies that doesn't need to take place. Second to that, I would say, educate yourself on the trans and gender diverse experience. Trans men don't get enough spotlight and attention. So yeah, that would be my takeaway, along with intersectionality tonight, looking at LGBTIQA+ as a diverse, as a layered, as a mixed experience, not just one rainbow stroke.
Yeah, thank you. Some incredibly important takeaways there, for sure.
No, I'm not ready yet.
No problem. Cindy, what's your takeaway?
So as I mentioned before, and as Rachel said, I think speaking out when nobody is able to do it for themselves, in whatever circumstances, that's really important. But at the same time, the way you call out people is very important too. So what I did at that forum, I think that was all right. But let's just say you have somebody at work who doesn't have a lot of understanding about queer issues and says something that's a bit off, or you're the first gay person that they've met and they're like, oh, you're gay? You're the first gay person I've ever met. Wow, what is that like? And not to take offense at that, because sometimes it's like genuine curiosity, and they've never interacted, with the gay community that much. And so if they do approach you like that, not to be like, oh my God, because I know some people do that, but
Can we just turn it off?
I guess I won't use this then. But just making sure that sometimes when you engage in narrative, you're not primarily motivated by anger or, you're not too aggressive. You have every right to express your emotions, but just know that how you approach people, you can be smart about that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. I think that's an incredibly important point. I'm sorry that we were disrupted by an angry speaker. Yeah, but not just calling people out, but being really considerate about the way in which we do that, and acknowledging that positive intent that people are coming with. And Janelle, before I wrap up, would you like to give any final takeaway?
Yes. I won't use the mic. Sure. So thank you for coming. Thank you for being present. I back everything that everyone has said, and the takeaway that I'd like to offer you all is about metabolizing within your own body your lived experience of privilege and of oppression, however that relates to you. When I'm talking about metabolizing it, I'm talking about the way that you process your lived experience from a day-to-day place. If you can acknowledge that your body is made up of your ancestral line of genetics and DNA and all of the cellular bodies of your ancestors, they have experienced trauma on some level from either coming from a privileged position or a position of oppression. And you could probably best bet that your matrilineal line is full of oppression just because of patriarchy. So if you can choose to consciously metabolize how that sits in your body, the way that you speak, the way that you move through the space, the way that you know if you enter a room, people will listen to you, or they will just even acknowledge that you walked into a room. If you can start to gauge the finite experience of your daily lived actions and consciously, or just start to be aware of how you operate with your level of embodied access to power, and feel what that feels like when you're in relation to anyone in your space, and just start to gauge how does your body respond to them, or are you used to speaking over the top of them, or did we just bypass the fact that there isn't any person sitting on this board that actually represents anything other than what you already identify with. Just things like that. I feel like that's the takeaway. Is really own living sovereign in your body and be responsible for that. On the back of what Cindy's saying, something that Tonya and I have been working with is the action of, instead of calling out, it's really corny, but it's about calling in. So it's the fact that we are all generally, unless we're psychopaths, we're generally well-intended people. And often just our good intentions bypass our accountability or responsibility for the fact that our impact has marginalised someone. Oh, I didn't mean that. Oh, if you feel offended that I said that, oh, I'm really sorry. You know, the way that we just offhand responsibility or accountability for the way that we behave. If we can start to engage with each other in a way that we're calling each other in, so instead of saying, hey, that was a real arsehole thing to say just then, or, you know, yes, name it, but just say, hey, I bet you didn't know that was arseholey, and this is why it was. And just say, hey, you know, I know that. Like, it's about us creating a new dialogue where we can stay human with each other in the same space and name something that we know we didn't want the impact to discriminate or create more harm.
Thank you very much. I think that's a really great place to leave it. So, firstly, I do have a few more things to just mention before we wrap up. But before I do, can we please thank our wonderful panelists? Okay, so before I leave you for the final hour of networking, drinks and canapes, I just wanted to give a final plug to Out for Australia, and also just to thank you so much for coming along tonight, despite the challenging weather. Thank you for that, Melbourne. So just letting you know, if you're interested in getting more involved with Out for Australia, we have our online mentoring program. So if you'd like to get more information about that, please see one of our volunteers. If I could get the team to just sort of wave your hand. So look around, and we'll be able to answer any questions if you want to hear more information. And then secondly, we have 2 events coming up next month. So firstly, this event will be going live tomorrow. around the mental health challenges of our community in the workplace. So we'll be hosting that in partnership with Accenture on the 11th of September. So do stay tuned for that. We've got a very exciting panel of mental health professionals and people working in this space who'll be leading that discussion. And then towards the end of September, we're running a very exciting event in partnership with one of our corporate partners, Ashurst, who will be partnering with us and the Melbourne Bisexual Network to run an event around Bisexual Visibility Day. So that's Bi Visibility Day is on the 23rd. Our event will be held on the 24th of September, and that will be a very exciting event. And just finally, if you want to just hear more about Out for Australia in general, you can sign up to our newsletter. You can follow us, like us on Facebook and Instagram. And aside from that, that's enough for me. Please enjoy the drinks and the canapes which have been provided by Woolworths. Thank you so much, Woolworths, for supporting us in this very, very lovely space. Yeah, looking forward to discussing more with you later tonight. Thanks, everyone. And before we go, we just have a couple of thank you gifts for our panelists. Wenjui will be providing them. But thanks very much.